Her hands started moving before her mind understood what they were doing. She was sitting across from a friend who complained about chronic back pain, and without thinking, without planning, her fingers began tracing patterns in the air above the painful area, symbols she had never learned, movements she had never been taught. And her friend felt heat, felt energy, felt something shift. That's when she knew. This knowledge didn't come from this lifetime. Her hands were remembering something her mind had forgotten. The experience shook her. For days afterward, she couldn't stop thinking about it. How did her hands know what to do? Where did those symbols come from? She had never studied energy healing, never taken a course or read a book about it. Yet, in that moment, her body had moved with absolute certainty, as if guided by muscle memory from another time. She needed answers, and that's what led her to the regression therapist. The session was scheduled for a quiet Tuesday afternoon. She arrived nervous, unsure of what she might find. The therapist was an older woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice. They talked first about the experience with her friend, about the strange knowing in her hands, about the feeling that this knowledge came from somewhere else. The therapist nodded, understanding. She had worked with many people who carried skills and memories from past lives. Healers especially seemed to bring their gifts forward, buried in the body, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The room was dimmed. Soft music played, something with flutes and gentle drums. The therapist guided her to close her eyes, to focus on her breathing, to let her body relax completely. With each breath, she felt herself sinking deeper into the chair. Her muscles loosened, her thoughts slowed. The sounds of the present world faded into the background, and she became aware of a different kind of space opening up inside her, a vast interior landscape where memory lived not in the mind but in the soul. The therapist's voice came from far away, asking her to go back beyond this life, back to the source of the knowledge in her hands, back to the lifetime where she had learned these healing techniques. And as the instructions settled into her awareness, she felt herself moving, not physically, but in consciousness, traveling backward through time, through the veil that separates one life from another, searching for the origin of what her hands remembered. At first, there was only darkness, a comfortable, peaceful darkness that held no fear. She floated in it, patient, waiting for something to appear. And then, gradually, she became aware of light, not bright light, but the warm, golden light of late afternoon sun. And with the light came sensation. She could feel air on her skin, could smell something rich and earthy, like dried herbs and woods, could hear distant sounds, voices speaking in a language she didn't recognize with her conscious mind but somehow understood in her soul. Her awareness sharpened, and suddenly she knew. She was standing. She could feel her feet, but they weren't in shoes. They were bare, touching smooth stone that was still warm from the day's heat. She looked down and saw her feet were smaller, darker than they were in her current life. She was wearing a simple white garment, something like a long tunic tied at the waist with a woven cord. And her hands, when she raised them to look, were young hands, strong hands, hands that knew how to heal. She understood where she was without needing to be told. Egypt, ancient Egypt. She could feel the truth of it in every cell of this body she inhabited. The air was different here, drier, filled with the scent of the Nile and the desert beyond. The light had a particular quality, sharp and clear, making everything appear more vivid, more alive. And she was in a temple. She knew this too, knew it with absolute certainty. This was a place of healing, a place where the sick and suffering came to be restored. The therapist's voice drifted through, asking her to look around, to describe what she saw. She turned slowly, taking in her surroundings. The room was large, with high ceilings supported by massive stone columns covered in hieroglyphs. The walls were painted with images of gods and goddesses, of healing rituals, of the human body and its energy centers. Sunlight streamed through openings near the ceiling, creating pools of golden light on the stone floor. Along one wall were shelves filled with clay jars and vessels, each one containing herbs, oils, minerals, the tools of her trade. In the center of the room were several low tables, and on these tables lay people, patients. She could see them clearly now. A woman with a swollen belly, pregnant but something wrong with the pregnancy. A man with a wounded leg, the flesh angry and infected. A child burning with fever. Mother kneeling beside the table with tears streaming down her face, and moving among them were other healers, dressed like her in simple white tunics. their hands moving with purpose and grace. She felt herself drawn to the child. The fever case, without conscious thought, her feet carried her across the room. She stood beside the table, looking down at the small face flushed with heat, eyes closed, breath rapid and shallow. The mother looked up at her with desperate hope, and she placed a hand gently on the woman's shoulder, a gesture of reassurance. Then she turned her full attention to the child. Her hands moved to hover above the small body, not touching it first, just feeling. She could sense it, the disturbance in the child's energy field. It was like a dark, tangled knot in the area of the chest and throat. The fever was the body's response to this blockage, trying to burn through whatever was stuck there, but the body alone couldn't clear it. The child needed help. She closed her eyes, centering herself. She could feel her own energy gathering, concentrating in her core, then flowing down through her arms and into her hands. Her palms began to warm, then grow hot. She started to move her hands in specific patterns above the child's body, never touching the skin but tracing lines and symbols in the air. These weren't random movements. Each gesture had meaning, purpose, effect. She was working with the invisible currents of life force that flowed through all living things, redirecting them, clearing blockages, restoring balance. As she worked, she became aware of something else. She wasn't doing this alone. There was a presence with her, guiding her hands, showing her where to focus, how to adjust her movements. It was her teacher. She couldn't see him with her physical eyes, but she could feel him standing behind her, his energy merged with hers, supporting and directing her work. He had been teaching her for years, since she was barely older than this child on the table. He had recognized her gift early and had taken her as his student, training her in the ancient techniques that had been passed down through generations of temple healers. Her hands moved faster now, tracing more complex patterns. She could feel the energy shifting, the blockage beginning to loosen and dissolve. The child's breathing slowed, deepened. The flush in the cheeks began to fade, and then, suddenly, the child's eyes opened. Clear eyes, fever gone, looking up at her with confusion and relief. The mother gasped, reached for her child, tears of gratitude flowing freely, but she was already moving on to the next patient. There was always someone else who needed help. The therapist's voice came again, asking her to move forward, to see more of this life, and the scene shifted. She was no longer in the temple healing room. She was in a different space, smaller, more intimate, a teaching room. And her teacher was there, visible now. He was an old man, thin and bent, with a long white beard and eyes that held infinite wisdom and kindness. He was showing her something, demonstrating a technique she hadn't learned yet. He held his hands in front of him, palms facing each other about a foot apart, and between his palms, she could see it, a ball of light forming, growing brighter, pulsing with energy. He explained that this was concentrated life force, drawn from the universal source that animated all things. A healer could gather this energy and direct it into a patient's body to accelerate healing, to restore vitality, to repair damage that the body couldn't fix on its own. He made it look easy, but she knew it wasn't. It took years of practice to develop the ability to sense and manipulate energy with this level of precision. It required not just technique but purity of intention. A healer had to be clear, had to have worked through their own emotional wounds and blockages, because whatever existed in the healer's energy field would transfer to the patient. You couldn't give true healing if you were carrying disease in your own system, whether physical or spiritual. She watched as he placed the ball of light into his own chest, demonstrating how to absorb universal energy to replenish yourself after giving to others. This was crucial, he explained. Many healers burned themselves out, giving and giving until they had nothing left, until they became sick themselves. But a true healer understood that they were not the source of healing, they were a channel. The energy came from the infinite well of life itself, flowed through them, into the patient. Their job was to stay clear, stay open, and allow the energy to move. He handed her a small clay jar, telling her to open it. Inside was a powder, dark green and fragrant. He explained that this was a combination of specific herbs, ground to a fine consistency, that could be mixed with oil and applied to wounds to prevent infection and speed healing. But the physical remedy alone was not enough. While applying it, she must also hold the intention of healing in her mind, must channel energy through her hands into the medicine, must speak the ancient words of power that activated the remedy's full potential. He taught her the words, made her repeat them until the sounds were perfect. until the vibration of the words resonated in her chest and throat. These were not words in the common language. They were older, sacred, handed down from the time when the gods themselves walked the earth and taught humans the healing arts. Each word carried a specific frequency, and when spoken correctly, these frequencies interacted with the body's own energy field to catalyze healing. The scene shifted again. She was older now, no longer a student but a master healer in her own right. Her teacher had passed on, but she could still feel his presence guiding her, as she now guided her own students. She was standing before a group of young initiates, teaching them the same techniques she had learned. She demonstrated how to scan a body with the hands, feeling for areas of heat or cold, density or emptiness, each sensation indicating a different kind of imbalance. She taught them about the body's energy centers, the points where life force concentrated and circulated. There were 7 major centers, running from the base of the spine to the crown of the head, and many minor centers at the joints and organs. When these centers were open and flowing freely, health was maintained. When they became blocked or overactive, disease manifested. A healer's job was to assess these centers and bring them back into balance. She showed them techniques for clearing blockages. One method involved placing one hand on the blocked center and the other hand on the corresponding point on the back of the body. Then visualizing light flowing from palm to palm, dissolving the obstruction. Another technique used sound, specific tones chanted or sung to vibrate the stuck energy and shake it loose. Yet another method employed crystals, certain stones that carried particular frequencies and could be placed on or around the body to shift the energy field. But the most powerful technique, she told her students, was the one that couldn't really be taught. It was the ability to see, not with physical eyes, but with the inner vision that came from a fully awakened consciousness. When a healer's own energy centers were completely clear and aligned, they could perceive the subtle body, the luminous field of light and color that surrounded and interpenetrated the physical form. In this field, they could see disease before it manifested in the flesh, could see dark spots or tears or distortions that indicated where problems would eventually appear. And by working on the energy level, they could prevent the disease from ever taking hold in the physical body. She remembered the first time she had experienced this seeing. She had been working with a patient, an older woman with no obvious symptoms, just a vague feeling of unease and fatigue. As she scanned the woman's energy field, suddenly her perception shifted, and she saw it clearly, a dark mass in the area of the left breast. The physical breast looked and felt normal, but in the energy body, the cancer was already there, already growing, just not yet dense enough to be felt by ordinary means. She had worked with that woman for months, using every technique she knew: energy, work, herbs, dietary changes, emotional clearing, prayer and ritual. And slowly, she had watched the dark mass in the energy field shrink and dissolve. When it was finally gone from the subtle body, she knew the woman was truly healed. Even though there had never been anything for a physical physician to diagnose or treat, this was preventative medicine at the highest level, catching disease in its energetic stage before it solidified into matter. The scene shifted once more, and now she was seeing the end of that life. She was old, her body worn but her spirit strong. She lay on a simple bed in her private chamber within the temple. Around her were her students, now masters themselves, come to be with her in her final hours. She felt no fear of death. She had worked with the dying for decades, had helped countless souls make the transition from physical form back to spirit. She knew death was not an ending but a doorway, a return to the source from which all life emerged. She could feel her life force withdrawing from her body, pulling back like a tide receding from the shore. Her breathing slowed, her heartbeat grew faint, and then, in a moment of absolute clarity, she separated from the physical form entirely. She was floating above her body, looking down at the empty shell that had served her so well for so many years. She felt light, free, filled with joy and peace. But before she fully left, she made a decision. The knowledge she had spent a lifetime acquiring, she didn't want to lose. She wanted to carry it forward into future lives, so she could continue the work of healing in other times and places. She imprinted the information deep into her soul, encoded it into the very fabric of her being, especially the knowledge in her hands. The muscle memory of healing movements, the sensitivity to energy, the ability to channel life force. All of this she wove into her eternal self, a gift she would give to her future incarnations. And then she released, and the scene dissolved. She was no longer in ancient Egypt. She was back in the therapist's office, in her current body, in the present time. But she was not the same person who had closed her eyes. Everything had changed, because now she understood. The movements her hands had made when healing her friend, those weren't random. They were the same movements she had used thousands of years ago in a temple by the Nile. The knowledge hadn't been lost. It had been sleeping, waiting for the right moment to wake up. Tears streamed down her face as the full impact of what she had remembered hit her. She wasn't starting from zero. She didn't need to spend years learning techniques from scratch. The knowledge was already inside her, had always been inside her, encoded in her cells, in her muscle memory, in the deepest part of her soul. All she had to do was trust it, allow it to flow, stop trying to understand with her logical mind, and let her hands remember what they already knew. The therapist smiled, recognizing the look on her face. She had seen this before, people remembering skills from past lives, understanding suddenly why they had always been drawn to certain practices or professions. The soul carried everything forward, every talent, every lesson, every bit of wisdom accumulated across lifetimes. Nothing was ever truly lost. In the days and weeks that followed, she experimented carefully with what she had remembered. She placed her hands on friends and family members, allowing her hands to move as they wanted to, tracing the patterns and symbols that came naturally. And every time, people felt something. Heat, tingling, energy moving, pain releasing, tension dissolving. She was doing it, actually doing the healing work she had done in that ancient lifetime. She started studying formally, taking courses in energy healing, reading books about traditional medicine and subtle anatomy. But she noticed something interesting. She already knew most of what the teachers were trying to convey. When they demonstrated a technique, her body recognized it before her mind understood it. When they talked about energy centers or meridians or the aura, she didn't need to learn these concepts, she just needed to remember them. The modern terminology was different, but the underlying reality was the same. She also began to remember other things, small details from that Egyptian life that filled in the larger picture. She remembered the herb gardens maintained by the temple, rows of plants grown specifically for healing purposes. She remembered the ritual bathing that healers performed before working with patients, a way of cleansing their own energy field so they would uncontaminate the patient with their personal issues. She remembered the sacred oils, the specific combinations of plant essences used for different conditions. She remembered the music, certain rhythms and melodies that were played during healing sessions to induce trance states and open the patient to deeper levels of transformation. And she remembered her teacher's words, spoken to her when she was still a young student, nervous about her abilities, doubting whether she was truly meant for this path. He had told her that healers were born, not made, that the gift of healing came from the soul, and if she carried this gift, it meant she had chosen it before. It meant she had done this work before, and had agreed to continue it in this life. Her doubts were just the human mind, trying to understand what the soul already knew. She needed to trust the deeper knowing, the wisdom that lived in her hands and her heart, not in her thinking mind. Those words resonated even more powerfully now, because she understood exactly what he had meant. She had done this before, had spent an entire lifetime perfecting these skills, and her soul had chosen to bring these skills forward, to use them again in this current life. In this modern world that desperately needed healing wisdom, even if it had forgotten that such wisdom existed, she started working with people professionally, offering energy healing sessions. At first, she was nervous, felt like a fraud, worried that she didn't have enough training or credentials. But the moment she placed her hands on a client and felt the energy begin to flow, all doubt vanished. Her hands knew what to do. They moved with confidence and precision, finding the blockages, clearing them, restoring balance. And clients got results. Chronic pain disappeared, anxiety lifted, depression eased, injuries healed faster. People felt more alive, more themselves, more connected to their own inner wisdom. Word spread, and more people came to her. She was amazed by how naturally it all unfolded, how the right clients appeared at the right time, how she always seemed to know exactly what each person needed even before they told her their symptoms. It was like the universe was supporting this work, confirming that yes, this was her path. This was what she was meant to do. She also noticed that her hands weren't the only part of her body that remembered. Sometimes during a session, words would come out of her mouth, guidance or insight that she had no conscious awareness of thinking. She would hear herself speaking and wonder where the information was coming from. But clients would gasp, would say that what she just said was exactly what they needed to hear, was the missing piece they had been searching for. And she realized that this too was part of her past life knowledge. She had been not just a physical healer but a spiritual guide, helping people understand the emotional and mental patterns that contributed to their physical symptoms. She remembered now how holistic the healing approach had been in that temple. They never treated just the body. They looked at the whole person, the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual dimensions. They understood that disease was often a message, a signal from the soul that something in the person's life was out of alignment. Healing required not just fixing the symptom but addressing the root cause, which was usually found in the way the person was thinking, feeling, or living. This understanding transformed how she worked. She began to ask her clients deeper questions. What was happening in their life when the symptoms first appeared? What emotions were they avoiding or suppressing? What beliefs were they holding that might be creating stress in their system? And as people explored these questions, often they would have breakthroughs, sudden realizations about the connection between their inner world and their physical health. And when they addressed those deeper issues, when they changed their perspective or released an old emotion or made a difficult decision they had been avoiding, the physical symptoms would often disappear on their own, without any further intervention. She also started teaching again. Just as she had in that ancient life, she offered workshops and classes, sharing the techniques she had remembered, helping others awaken their own healing abilities. Because she understood now that everyone had the capacity to heal, both themselves and others. It wasn't a special gift reserved for a select few. It was a natural human ability that most people had simply forgotten or been taught to doubt. Her job was to help people remember, to give them permission to trust their hands, their intuition, their inner knowing. In her classes, she would guide students to place their hands on each other and just feel. She told them not to think about it, not to try to figure it out with their minds, but to simply notice what sensations arose. And inevitably, students would feel something, heat or cold, tingling or pulsing, a magnetic pull or a subtle vibration, and their faces would light up with wonder and recognition. They were feeling energy, the same life force that ancient healers had worked with for thousands of years. She taught them the basic techniques she had remembered: how to scan the body with the hands, how to gather energy and direct it, how to use breath and intention to amplify the healing effect, how to protect themselves from taking on a patient's negative energy, how to know when to refer someone to a medical doctor versus when to trust that energy work alone would be sufficient. She emphasized the importance of working in partnership with conventional medicine, not in opposition to it. Both approaches had value, and the best outcomes often came from integrating the two. Years passed, and her practice grew. She worked with hundreds of people, witnessing countless healings, some dramatic and immediate, others slow and gradual. She saw cancer disappear, saw chronic pain of decades finally release, saw depression lift without medication, saw broken bones heal in half the expected time, saw people transform not just physically but emotionally and spiritually, becoming more whole, more authentic, more aligned with their true selves. And through it all, she carried a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the regression session that had helped her remember. Gratitude for that past life where she had learned these skills. Gratitude for her ancient teacher who had trained her with such patience and wisdom. Gratitude for her soul's decision to carry this knowledge forward across lifetimes. And gratitude for every patient and student who trusted her enough to receive her work, because each one taught her something new, helped her refine her skills, deepened her understanding of the healing process. She thought often about the implications of what she had experienced. If she could remember healing knowledge from a past life, what else might be stored in the soul's memory? What other skills, talents, wisdom might people be carrying from their previous incarnations, dormant and waiting to be awakened? She began to see past life regression not just as a curiosity or a form of therapy, but as a practical tool for accessing the full potential of the soul. Why spend years learning something from scratch when you might have already mastered it in a previous life? Why struggle to find your purpose when your soul already knows what it came here to do? She encouraged everyone she met to explore their own past lives, not from a place of ego or entertainment, but as a genuine inquiry into the depths of their being, because she believed that everyone had gifts to recover, wounds to heal, wisdom to remember. The soul was an eternal student, accumulating experience across many lifetimes, And all of that accumulated experience was available to be accessed if you knew how to look. Looking back on her life now, she could see how everything had led to this moment of remembering: the chronic illness in her childhood that had made her interested in healing, the friend who had complained of back pain at exactly the right time, triggering the spontaneous emergence of her healing abilities, the therapist she had found who specialized in past life regression. None of it was random. It was all orchestrated by her soul, which knew what she needed in order to remember, in order to step fully into the work she came here to do. And she knew this was just the beginning. There was more to remember, more techniques to recover, more wisdom to unearth from the depths of her soul's memory. She could feel it, like a vast library waiting to be explored, shelves and shelves of knowledge acquired across countless lifetimes. And she was excited to continue the journey, to keep diving deeper, to keep allowing her soul to teach her what it already knew, because that's what she understood now. She didn't need to seek wisdom outside herself. She didn't need a guru or a master or an external authority to tell her what was true. All the wisdom she needed was already inside her, encoded in her soul, accessible through memory. Her hands knew, her body knew, her soul knew. All she had to do was remember, trust, and allow the ancient knowledge to flow through her once again. Subscribe to witness more souls remembering what they came here to do.